Hello everyone. It has been a while since I've made a long format analysis kind of breakdown video, and in the meantime the world's gone crazy. It's gone upside down, inverted. Good is bad, bad is good, freedom is slavery, man is woman, all that kind of crap. And in this video I'm going to attempt to put my finger right on the pulse and then sort of slip it under the vein, pull it, and we'll have a peek underneath it. We'll try and see what's going on here from a behavioral psychological point of view, since there's a lot of manipulation and deceit going on. Okay, so this is about empathy and how horrible the situation with empathy has become. This extends out to love, compassion, those ideas, and the word and the definition itself, how it's used, how it's portrayed, what people think of it. And the other day I made a video mocking this issue, and I didn't realize till afterwards, I didn't think of it, but a bit too many people took it seriously. It wasn't quite clear enough that I was being sarcastic, and that kind of plays into the idea of what this issue actually is. I found it a bit strange because in the video I was literally instructing people to induce their own delusional separation from reality, right? And that video is going to be linked in the description of this video. If you want to have a look at that, maybe do that first before you come here. But I thought it would be necessary to make this video explaining things from a serious, analytical, critical thinking point of view. So I've been sticking my finger in this issue for at least a year now, to try to find out what other people's thoughts are, and this is kind of, you know, where it's converged to at the moment. So what I'm going to do is show you some of this video, and this video is a 10-minute TED Talk by Simon Baron Cohen, who is a professor of developmental psychopathology at the University of Cambridge and fellow at Trinity College, Cambridge. He's the director of the Autism Research Center in Cambridge. Is a very popular author as well. So this video is titled "The Erosion of Empathy." Now, it seemed just by the title that it would correlate with my findings, based on the non-exhaustive research I've done. I've had discussions and gathered information from maybe 60 people all up over 2 or 3 different studies and discussion groups and things like that, just to get a feel for what other people's thoughts are on the topic of empathy, and other peripheral topics. So we're going to watch this part, and I'm going to pause it every now and then, and yeah.
The traditional explanation for human cruelty is in terms of evil. I find the concept of evil unhelpful and unscientific. It implies that the person is possessed by some supernatural force. Even worse, it's dangerously circular. If the definition of evil is the absence of good, then all we're really saying is he did something bad because he's not good. It hasn't.
That's a really good point. He's spot on. The logic of that kind of definition is circular, and what it does is it kind of plays on 2 polar ends of a spectrum, rather than considering that there may be some sort of gray area in the middle. Yeah, so to say that if someone is not good, they are evil, it's a mischaracterization or a misnomer, It's leads to assumptions and leads to stigma and that kind of stuff. You know, it's kind of the underlying premise might be similar to, if you're not with us, then you're against us, that kind of mentality, right? Now, I don't know what the actual definition of evil is, but I'm just gonna hang on this because he said it himself, and he said it was dangerously bad definition, dangerously bad statement, you could say. And we'll continue on, but we're going to come back to this. We're going to come back to this.
Really taken us any further forward. In contrast, the concept of empathy, I'm going to argue, is scientifically helpful. You can measure it, you can study it. Empathy has two distinct components, cognitive and affective. Cognitive empathy is the ability to imagine someone else's thoughts and feelings, putting yourself into someone else's shoes. It's the recognition part. Affective empathy is the drive to respond with an appropriate emotion to what someone else is thinking or feeling. And I'm going to argue that low affective empathy is a necessary factor to explain human cruelty.
Okay, so what he's saying here, what he's saying is that you can have empathy and you can still make the wrong decisions. You can still do the bad thing. So your judgment that you make based on your empathy can still be wrong. And I don't disagree with that. What he's saying, he's put two different outcomes from the process of empathy, and we'll go on.
Empathy isn't all or none. It comes by degrees, and there are individual differences in it. So it gives rise to the empathy bell curve. Most of us are in the middle of this spectrum with average amounts of empathy. There are some people who have above average levels of empathy. But what are the factors that can lead an individual to have low empathy, either temporarily or permanently?
So he's focusing on low empathy being an issue here. Yeah. Just want to point that out too.
What are those social factors? What are those biological factors? One social factor is obedience to authority. The experiment by...
So this is accurate as well. See, with this video, he's saying a whole bunch of valid points, and at the end of it, he's gonna contradict it all.
Stanley Milgram at Yale University showed that people are willing to administer electric shocks to someone to help them learn if they're instructed to do so by an authority figure. This suggests that simply following orders may be one factor that can erode our empathy.
I'm going to have to get back to that as well, yeah? Okay, because he's ignoring the other side of it, yeah? Having too much empathy can, relying too much on empathy, excess empathy, can lead to that as well. But he doesn't seem to be pointing that out.
A second social factor is ideology. When the terrorists flew the planes into the World Trade Center on 9/11, we have to assume that they were in the grip of a strongly held belief that they were doing the right thing. Of course, we don't know whether the terrorists who signed up for that action had low empathy to begin with, but it's possible that their ideological beliefs were another factor that could erode their empathy for their victims. And a third social factor is in-group, out-group relations. In Rwanda...
I'm going to forward this. I'm going to forward this because he's just showing the different sort of facets of how empathy, or the lack of empathy, interplays with bad outcome, right? And he goes on to use a serial killer. I think it was Dahmer, that he was talking about, where he's like, he preyed on certain types of women and got them to sort of sympathize with him, and they turned out to be his victims. So he acknowledges all these things that, and he's not sure if that serial killer actually was lacking in empathy or not. I'm gonna skip forward. He goes through a bunch of stuff, but how he ends it is another matter. Where are we? How he ends this, right? Now, just remember that, oh, that's a bit too far, is it? No. Just remember what he said originally about the circular logic, or the circular definition, with evil being defined as a lack of good, and how you can't do that because it's problematic, it's dangerous. He called it dangerous. Listen to this now.
We could wait for our political leaders.
I'm going to go back.
Palestinian bullet, and given in to the emotion of the same awful pain of having lost a loved one.
So he was just describing people connecting because they empathize with one another, and they, two victims, for example, and understanding more from that, right? But watch what he says now. This is the end of it.
Empathy is our most valuable natural resource for conflict resolution. We could wait for our political leaders to use empathy, and that would be refreshing. But actually, we can all use our empathy. As Siham and Robbie told me, the conflict won't stop until we empathize.
The conflict won't stop until we empathize. Even though at the start of the video, he said that logic is bad, because it implies that if we don't empathize, that there will be conflict, right? So the point is that he's playing against the two polarizations of lack of empathy and empathy, just switched on and switched off. Even though he broke it down into the two reactions, or the two types of responses that someone can have if they do have empathy. So he explained in the beginning of the video that you can have empathy and you can still have bad outcomes. You can still do bad things to people. So he at one stage, even, I'll put a link to this video in there as well, he said that he showed a bunch of people that could empathize, but they didn't care. The problem, he said, was that they didn't care. And now at the end of this video, he's saying that the problem is that, we need more empathy. We need to empathize, right? So what happens if we empathize more? What happens? Because I was saying that he's talking about a lack of empathy. Let's have a look at what happens if you have too much empathy. Yeah. So first, let's just see the definition of empathy. So this is a broad definition. So it's the ability to identify with or understand another's situation or feelings, the attribution of one's own feelings to an object, the intellectual identification of the thoughts, feelings, or state or another person. So I think that's kind of where it is. Yeah, when it was described to me, it was like being able to imagine yourself in someone else's shoes, right? Now we have a look at the definition of empathy as far as Merriam-Webster dictionary goes, because this is really telling. This is really, really, really telling. So they say that empathy is the action of understanding. So it's saying it is actually understanding. The action of understanding, or being aware of, or being sensitive to, and vicariously experiencing. So it's using the word experience, but vicarious, so a disconnected experience. So you experience the feelings, thoughts, and experiences of another person without having those thoughts, feelings, and experiences fully communicated in an objectively explicit manner. Right? Now, in a second, I'm going to cut out all the buzzwords out of there and get down to the logic of that, right? But then the second definition, which is basically a revision of a summarized revision of the first one, reads: the imaginative projection of a subjective state into an object so that the object appears to be infused with it. Now that's a bit of a head fuck. What I've done is I've cut through some of the crap there, and we can, all right. So with that definition, I cut out the emotions, feelings, and all that kind of stuff and just sort of shortened it up and just put things there and them, right? The action of understanding, being aware, or being sensitive to, and vicariously experiencing things without them being fully communicated in an objectively explicit manner. So that means that you are understanding something or being sensitive to it or being aware of it without that thing actually, objectively, without you actually seeing it, without you actually hearing it, without you actually interacting with it, right? That's what that says. Well, that's what it means. Now, the second definition is there as is, and what we've got here is we've got a fusion of a few different ideas which you wouldn't expect to be fused. They should really be considered and spoken about as distinct. Yeah. So you've got you've got something that you've imagined, you've got something that you've understood, and something that you've experienced. Yeah. So if you merge all those three things together and assume that something you imagine constitutes understanding and it constitutes an actual experience, what's going on there? What is that? If your imagination is enough to let you have a handle on everything that's going on in the real world, it's kind of like a delusion. And the second definition there is essentially saying that you've got a subjective state being fused with an object, which is the fusion of subjective and objective concepts. And that's the breakdown of that's a delusion of reality. That's dissolving the very core aspect of how we get a grip and handle on reality, how we think critically. If you confuse subjective concepts with objective concepts, then a lie can be the truth. Fact can be fiction. Good can be bad. Up can be down. Your feelings can be factual. Yeah. There needs to be distinction between all these things. Otherwise, you're going to have some major issues. You're going to have some major issues, cognitive issues and mental health issues. There definitely needs to be a distinction here. That's a really warped definition. Now I'm going to we'll see what happens when you have more empathy, right? So, empathy, what you get is an empath. So an empath is one who has the ability to sense emotions, someone who is empathetic or practices empathy. And the other definition, a person with an extrasensory empathetic ability. So more empathy, right? Like the ultra empathy. Capable of sensing the emotions of others around them in a way unexplained by conventional science and psychology. So that's fairly accurate, I'd say. Although the studies that I've done, empaths, when I've asked them to describe their experience, they describe it all differently. And some of them won't even agree with this definition. And they'll say that someone who is empathetic is different from someone who's an empath. And they don't seem to know themselves what empathy, well, they understand the basic definition of empathy, but their own experience, they can't agree to what that experience actually constitutes. It's different for all of them. Which is kind of dangerous, I think, because if you're going to call yourself something, then it should be a clear definition and not variable, I think. Now, if you have more empaths, if you have more people with excess empathy, then what you get is empaths and narcissists, right? They're said to have a sort of symbiotic relationship, these two. So narcissists are people who do not have the ability to empathize. So they can't, they lack empathy. And that's seen as a very bad thing. In the studies that I've done, asking people, they consider narcissists to be evil, destructive, evil, really, really bad people. Although they end up in relationships with them. Yeah. So the relationship between a narcissist and an empath is one-sided, where one is the giver and the other takes as much as they can, thus leaving the other dry. Much like a parasitic relationship, the empath in the relationship wants to help the other and provide a source of support and love to the narcissist, who thrives on this type of attention. Given the manipulative and selfish tendencies of the narcissist, they end up driving the relationship and holding control of the relationship over the empath. So what happens if we have, what is he actually saying in this video, at the end of the video, where he gets that big applause after he says it? I'll get back to it now. Let's just back it up.
We can all use our empathy. As Siham and Robbie told me, the conflict won't stop until we empathize. Thank you.
Big applause, right? So what that does is, that's the final statement. That's what gets the applause. That's what gets the attention. That's what, for the most part, cements in people's brains as the instruction. And throughout the video, he's talking about leading people astray and giving instructions to people, essentially brainwashing them, or giving them the wrong impression. And this is what bad people do. For a lot of them, they will either pretend to empathize with someone. You look at the Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell thing, where they were going around preying on young girls who were in situations where they may have been vulnerable and in poverty, needing money, or lost, and they came forward and said, "Hey, we realize that you're in this situation, and we'd like to help you. Here's what we can do, and we can both have this arrangement." So they were very aware. A lot of these people who do bad, they're very much aware of what they're doing. So they can either empathize, but they don't care, like Simon Baron Cohen was saying, or they can't empathize at all. Yeah. And the whole that he presents, but then doesn't actually, point at the end, is that if we have more empathy, we have more empaths, we have more victims for the people who are out there thinking we need more empaths and being fooled by people who either fake empathy or they fake care, they pretend to care, and they take advantage of these people. So why is he not pointing that out? Why is he not getting to that? What it should be, the important thing should be the ability to recognize whether you can or cannot empathize, whether you can or cannot imagine what it's like to be in someone else's shoes. And once you reflect on yourself and say, hey, can I do this? Or can I not do this? Am I doing this correctly? Once you put a line of inquiry onto yourself about whether you do actually understand, whether your empathy does actually constitute understanding or not, then you can make a decision. So at that point, he showed empathy and then the split, and then he just went straight split. But the thing that makes the empathy split that way in terms of the decision-making process afterwards is the ability to recognize whether you can or cannot empathize in a particular situation with a particular person. And while that can lead to good and bad, because sometimes people don't care and they want to be malicious, even if they have empathy, the real solution would be to acknowledge that point where it's most important to recognize whether you can or can't do something. Because at the moment what's going on is you've got a bunch of mental health disorders, under the banner of antisocial personality disorder, which are characterized with their symptoms. The first symptom on there is lack of ability to empathize, lack of empathy, right? So the antithesis or the reaction to that is for people in general society to say we need more empathy, without actually understanding the finer points and the complexity of those mental health disorders. So they just call for more empathy, even though more empathy equates to more victims for these and people with antisocial personality disorder. And I'm not trying to say all of them are bad people and they're all searching for victims and stuff, but that's what it's going to do. It's going to make people think that the real issue is the lack of empathy, when it's not. The real issue is whether you can determine yourself, whether you exercise your cognitive ability and question yourself, as opposed to just believing that more empathy is a good thing. Now, he's overlooked that. Now, let's just go here and we'll find out a little bit about this guy. All right, early life education, autism research, prenatal neuroscientology, neuro something. And he's done a bunch of stuff in gender and sex differences as well. And where am I getting to? This guy's cousin is Sacha Baron Cohen, the guy who does the Borat movies and Ali G and all that kind of stuff. He's Hollywood royalty. Yeah. And in Hollywood, you know what they do? They prey on victims. They there's a lot of sexual harassment and raping and abuse and shit like that happens, right? And I'm not trying to play on the element of guilty by association here, because I'm associated with Hollywood as well. I've been working for the last 10 years. I've worked with people who come directly off Hollywood movie sets and broadcast industry. So I see these people who have been on set and have worked with the directors and the cinematographers and casting directors, all those people, and they tell me straight up, casual as anything, director's a pedophile, So I've had 3 people tell me openly, without me questioning them in any specific way, about the abuse. So if I'm connected in some way, if I'm associated with Hollywood because I've serviced their industry and I know about this, then why doesn't this guy know about it? His cousin is essentially like Hollywood elite, Hollywood royalty. He can go in and make these ridiculous movies, which may be funny, fair enough, but he can get away with a hell of a lot. And he should know this. Simon Baron Cohen should know what's happening in Hollywood. He should know that they prey on victims by feigning empathy or having empathy and not caring. He knows, and he knows that these victims fall for that kind of dynamic. They're trying to help me. Oh, they're trying to help me. I need to get into this industry. They're trying to help me. I'm hard done by. They're offering something to me. They must care. Okay, I'll do it. And then downward spiral into abuse and stuff. So why isn't he pointing that part of it out? It's a bit strange, and the fact that he's contradicted himself. Yeah, it's just really bizarre to me that this would happen. And this is just secondary. You can look up the definitions of experience and understanding yourselves, but imagination does not constitute experience or understanding in any explicit way, yet that definition made it sound like it did. Made it sound like it was kind of a normal thing and not anything that could ever be a delusion. Is there anything more I need to say? Is there anything more? That seems to be it. That seems to be it. You've got a whole bunch of people who are spouting their good intentions as far as we need more empathy, we need more empathy, we need more love and compassion and care. When no, that's not what we need. That's the actual problem, is that people think we need more of that, so they fall for it. But we, like I'm saying, we need more critical thinking. We need people to not let their feelings get in the way of facts, not let their reasonable judgment get in the way of their feelings. And basically the video that I made previously, which I implore you to go and watch, the sarcastic one, it seems as though me using a whole bunch of buzzwords in there and telling people to care and love and exercise your empathy, yeah, in a certain tone of voice with a certain expression, it was like people fell for it, even though I was saying like crazy stuff in there. So it seems there's a practical example of it right there. So that's how empathy is really causing a lot of problems. I'm gonna put myself here. That's how it's causing problems, because it's not something that we need more of per se, but we need to be more aware. We need to be more aware of how we think and how we feel, and the differences between how we feel and what's actually going on. Yeah, I was talking to a guy with a degree in psychology or something, and he's working with special needs kids. Like he assesses them and he helps them. And he was saying, when I see a child and that child is over there and acting out of order, yeah, and doing something that's I guess dysfunctional or out of order, then I use my empathy to understand that child, so I know how to treat them. So tell me, how do you understand someone if you haven't spoken to them, if you haven't explicitly communicated with that person, if you haven't ran through 2 or 3 attempts to do something with them and talk to them and try this, did it work? No, we can try this and tweak it. The scientific process, right? How can you understand someone? How can you formulate a solution if you haven't actually done the data collection and the analysis and the testing? You can't. This isn't science. And he was saying, oh yeah, we can, Simon Baron-Cohen, we can say it's a scientific process, or we can explain it scientifically. Fair enough, if you can, you can. But he's not getting to the heart of it. He's pretty much bypassing the very core part of it, which we need to acknowledge and understand to avoid the very problem that he says exists. And I just think it's really bizarre. I think it's really bizarre. I think we need to talk to one another more. I think we need to stop using buzzwords. I think we need to we need to stop assuming that we know what love means. Like the statement or the phrase, the sort of the activist phrase "love is love," for example, which was in support of the same-sex marriage debate thing. It's a logical fallacy. Love is love. That doesn't mean anything. If anything, it erodes and dissolves and muddies up the definition of love. It negates it. And we should be very careful and very mindful of our words. We should think about the definition of every word. And if it's a broad definition, if you don't understand it, then you need to ask for clarity instead of imagining that what you imagine is the way reality is and just running off that, because that's delusional. That's delusional. Thanks for listening. I hope that made sense, and I hope that slowly we can do something about this. Talk. Okay, end video.